This evening is on the Adeline Springs proposed project.
Good evening, Planning Commission, and welcome to Commissioner Guerrero. So this is a study session for a redevelopment of a parcel on 3737 Adeline Street. So this is the site. It's about almost a third of an acre. This is what's called what we call the star intersection, where you have San Pablo running to the east, West MacArthur Boulevard running here. And to get you in context, we have the lane splitter building right here. Across is Adeline Place. In this area is what we call the Mass building. This is where the project intersection is under construction. That's the project that has had some difficulties with fires recently. So there is an existing building, one-story existing building, around 6,000 square foot building, which has been used by the U.S. Spring to manufacture and repair truck springs. The owner has decided to sell, the ownership has decided to sell and relocate the business elsewhere, and at the moment they are still at the site and are leasing the site from the applicant, the current owner, which brought the property about a year ago. So this is the existing site plan, and this is the footprint of the existing building. What they are proposing is to demolish the building and replace it with a building which occupies a similar footprint, and the rear of the parcel will be occupied by a parking lot that will provide parking to the building. So the plan is to build 29 rental residential units and live-work spaces on the ground floor. The entry to the building will be off Adeline Street. This is where the lobby is. There is a community room for the residents, and the rest of the building is going to be occupied by the live-work spaces. And that's about 5,000 square feet in size. The rear of the building has the 15 parking spaces that I mentioned. The bike parking is located here, and the trash will also be located in this area right here. This is the second floor plan and the third floor plans. Basically, there's a mix of studios, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom units, and 3 bedroom units over the 4 floors. So this is the 4th floor plan, and this is the 5th floor plan. On the top of the 5th floor, there is a amenity space about 2,000 square feet in size, which at this point has not been developed, but it's for indicating where the amenities for the project lie. This sort of gives you the sections. The height of the building is 55 feet. Since on the ground floor you have live-work units, the ceiling height on the first floor is 15 feet, and subsequently each floor above that is 10 feet. So this is the unit mix. As you can sort of take a look at the different numbers, and as well as the different sizes of each type of unit. Here are the elevations. This is the Adeline Street elevation. We have a concrete base with a glazing to kind of activate the pedestrian realm. And these will be the live-work units. The upper floors have cement board panel, and they also have what's a solid stained wooden batten, which serves as a second skin for a portion of the building. So this is additional, it's the MacArthur Boulevard elevation, and this is where the vehicular entry to the site will occur. This is the south elevation, so this would be facing the adjacent neighbor. This is illustrative of the proposed mural that they're proposing. And these are some of the perspectives. The applicant plans to go into detail of what the design concept is about and what the intention was behind the proposed design. In terms of conformity to planning regulations, this lies in the MURS zone, and it is a transit hub overlay zone. So what the transit hub overlay zone does is essentially is to reduce the parking requirements by half. Use classifications, we have two uses here: multi-unit residential, which is allowed by right in the mixed-use residential zone, and they're proposing what we consider a light live-work unit, which requires a conditional use permit. In terms of density, the base density here is 50 units per acre, and the bonus increases to 100. Their density, the proposed density, is 100 units per acre, and therefore they will be needing 100 bonus points for density. FAR, the base is 1.5, which can be increased to 3.0. What they're proposing is 2.3, and this calculates to 53 bonus points for FAR. Height, this is in the base height of 40 feet and with the bonus height of 75 feet, and they are proposing 55 feet, and this will trigger 43 points for height. So when, as the Commission is familiar, when a project requires different bonus points in different categories, we take the highest bonus points that is required, and that is the bonus points that they need to provide us. So in this case, it would be a full 100 points for bonus. So in terms of how they propose to get the bonus points, as the Commission knows, half of any required bonus points need to come out of affordable housing, and this project actually is going to provide affordable units in the project, and this calculates to 5 units, with 1 at very low income, 2 at low income, and 3 at moderate income levels. The remaining 50 points that they need, they plan to provide it by writing us a check towards contribution to the citywide fund to support local serving businesses. And for every 10 points, they need to give us 1% of the project construction valuation. And for this project, that equals to 5% of the construction valuation that they will need to write a check for. Not sure what this is doing this. So in terms of unit mix and family-friendly design guidelines, the requirement is that 50% of the units need to be 2 and 3 bedroom units, of which at least 15% need to be 3 bedroom units, and only 10% can be studios. The project does meet this requirement. In terms of family-friendly floor plans, these have not been submitted yet. This is not unusual. This is a study session, and the purpose of the study session today is to get initial feedback from the Commission. As I'd mentioned, that this site is in the transit hub overlay district, where all the parking is reduced by 50%. So when you calculate all that out, as outlined in the staff report, the requirement for this project is 15 to 24 spaces. They are proposing 15 spaces, so they do meet the requirement. In terms of bicycle parking, the requirement is 3 short-term and 31 long-term spaces. They are showing at this time 18 uncovered spaces. It's not very clear whether these will be secured or not, so this is something that they would need to rework to meet this requirement. In terms of open space, the required private open space is 40 square feet per unit, and that calculates to about 1,400 square feet. The required common open space is 20 square feet per unit, and this includes the live-work units as well. And our regulations also allow the common space to be substituted for private open space at the rate of 2 to 1. In terms of the proposal, we counted about 14 units that have a balcony. As I mentioned, they also have a rooftop common open space that's about 2,000 square feet. Whether they all meet the requirement is unclear at this time, but they do know that they do need to meet these requirements, so they would need to figure this out as the project develops further. Sidewalk design guidelines. The applicable sidewalk widths in this area is 12-foot wide sidewalk with a minimum of 7.5 clear pedestrian pathway and a 4.5-foot landscaped area. The existing sidewalks are less than 12 feet. On Adeline Street, therefore, the proposed building will need to be set back by 2 or 3 feet. And along the MacArthur Boulevard frontage, either the building or the curb will need to move by 2 feet in order to meet these guidelines. A community meeting was held on June 13th. About seven community members attended the meeting. There was a concern regarding that there was not sufficient parking provided for the project. There was concern regarding potential shadow impacts on the neighbors. There was concern regarding the building massing in relation to the adjacent house, especially along Adeline Street. The staff also reviewed this project internally, and the suggestion that was made was to move the bulk of the building away from the adjacent house on Adeline Street and increase it toward the intersection of Adeline and MacArthur Boulevard. Keep in mind that the height limit here is 75 feet, and the height of the proposed building is 55 feet, so they do have some room to maneuver, and that would trigger additional bonus points, but they need 100 bonus points for density in any case, so that would not change the economics of the project regarding at least the bonus points is concerned. The use of murals to cover some of the blank concrete walls was received with mixed comments. And there was some discussion of introducing road diet measures, particularly along MacArthur Boulevard, and there was discussion regarding including a new crosswalk on Adeline Street so that folks could walk across to the Lane Splitter restaurant. This is something that Public Works staff and planning staff need to work together, and we would be coming up with some recommendations down the road. So in terms of issues that we would like your feedback on is on design. Does the commission agree with staff to move some of the bulk of the building away from the adjacent house on Adeline Street and increase it toward the intersection? How does the commission feel about the use of murals as design features? In terms of bonus points, does the commission find the contribution to the small business fund to obtain the 50 bonus points acceptable? And in terms of amenities, does the commission have any suggestion for provision of additional resident amenities? That concludes my presentation. The applicant is here and will be providing you a presentation. So if you have questions for me, I would be happy to answer at this time.
So, are there any questions for Miru?
I've got a couple of questions.
Okay.
Maru, maybe I misread one of your slides, but when the parking slide that you talked about, did I see a discussion about 18 spaces versus 15, or was it just 15 spaces that are being proposed?
15 are being proposed.
Okay.
The 18 I think you saw was for bicycle parking.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. And then when you calculate or establish the height of a project, do you normally just take it to the roof, or do you not include any kind of balustrade or anything like that that goes above it, the roof line?
The basic height is till the roof line,
Okay.
the highest point on the roof line. There are certain features that are allowed to go above that, but the basic height is the roof, yeah.
Thank you.
Can you remind us, do you know what the height of the Moz building is going to be and the one on MacArthur across San Pablo Avenue?
So the existing mass building will remain the same. That's going to be adaptive. The residential building behind that is, I'm going by memory, but I think it is close to 70, 75 feet.
And the one, the affordable project on San Pablo?
The affordable project is also similar height. It's around 65 feet. The 3706 San Pablo, correct? Yeah.
Do you have questions for Maru?
Not at this time.
Okay. Would the applicant like to come up and give a presentation? Thank you, Maru.
Yeah. So let me just zoom. Okay, should I just do it this way? How do you?
Do it however you like.
Very. So I will just use this. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Good evening, commissioners. Thank you, Stephen. My name is Kava Massey of Kava Massey Architects. There's also Ali Kashani and Joe Blum here that are the developers and the real people behind the project, and Jordan from my office is here also. We have a site model of actually the entire block that we made. It'd be nice to bring it up. Yeah, why don't you bring it up? Jordan ran into the door and broke the freeway, just like the cypress. It fell right over. But so a couple of things that have kind of pushed us in a certain direction was the fact that projects like this normally impact the people that are right next to them the most. And so we were trying to be as cognizant of that as possible, because given the intersection, it's as kind of sturdy and gritty and urban and as kind of menacing and dark and deep and wide and everything you can imagine goes on in that intersection. So that sort of width of that intersection allows for the building to go up for sure. Building going up higher requires a different type of construction, which actually requires more money and budget. So we've kept the footprint of the new building fairly close to what's there now. So on the west side, we go out on the ground floor 4 feet towards the west with our new footprint. And on the south side, next to the house, we're actually 4 feet away. When the old building is actually on the property line, our building sets back 4 feet. On the upper floors, we actually come back out to the property line on the south and go another 8 feet out as a cantilever. We've kept the ground floor, as Maru mentioned, to 15 feet of height, just to give the live-work a real sense of being live-work and kind of matching what traditionally retail space has been about. And then the upper floors, and that floor is actually all going to be concrete, and then whatever's above it is wood, which is fairly common. So as a sort of a gesture towards the house to the south, we ended up lowering one of the floors by quite a bit, actually, to put a garden up there. And we feel like it's definitely a gesture. Whether it's enough or not is sort of your reaction to it. But as part of the community meeting, we actually even brought it down and pushed it back a little bit more. We took one of the bedrooms on the south side and moved it around the corner to the other side. I can point to it in a second. So here's the F5, I think is what gets me the full. Come on. What did I do, Mira?
Just go to view. Full screen mode. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the existing footprint of the building, and there's a few little sheds in the yard to the west of the building. The building's around 20, we're kind of guessing like 23 maybe, 24 feet. We counted the blocks to see how tall it was. But it's a pretty tall one-story building. And there's a lot of action in the yard. That's in between the existing building and Vicky, Sewell, and Steve's yard. Oh, I went to... So, yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple building, honestly. The footprint, both on the ground floor, you know, the lobby goes right through, so you can get to the lobby from the parking, which is secure with fencing around it and a gate. And on the street side, you can come all the way through, get to the elevator, which is right here. And then these live-work units all have some access to the lobby. These four do, and then but also access from the street. And these two have actually this is the only two that don't have access. This one from the back, this one from Adeline. So what I was referring to was this little bump out that we ended up with when we took a bedroom off of this end of the building on the next floor up. And you can see it here. And the reason we stopped there has to do with where the stair was, because the stair can't really stop. It has to go up to the top floor. And that's also another issue with just raising this portion of the building up by taking this back, is that we need two sets of stairs to go up to the very top and provide exit. And that means a pretty tall, skinny thing kind of poking out of the top of the building. So it's going to be hard to make it disappear. So as far as the shadows go, obviously the winter time is the one that would be most impactful, given the sun is lower in the sky, and this shadow study is for the building that's there now, and this is for the one that we are proposing. I mean, we just basically got lucky in that both of our neighbors are to our south and to the west. So the sun, in essence, never really is going to be that big of an issue. And again, it's not something that we had control over. It just, we got lucky. And again, when you go back and forth between these two, which I did quite a bit, try to see. Good Lord. I'm so sorry about this. They're pretty comparable. I mean, maybe the lower left-hand side, where the shadow is the most or the longest, has a little bit of an impact, but it ain't much. So that's the shadow. In terms of the elevation, we like the idea of reusing some of the art, trying to find the artists, because those paintings are actually really nice, some of them. there may be a little too many of them, and it's kind of not very well organized. But I mean, some of them are really nice. So if we can do it, we like doing it. If not, we'll figure out how to do the nicest thing with some board form concrete or something that is done basically on a lot of multi-unit housing projects. So, you know, in terms of the corner with the curved piece, we kind of like the idea of these balconies kind of doing something like this, where as they curve every other floor, they overhang the floor above and below, and it sort of created a nice form. And we felt like if when you're driving by there in the intersection, the movement is going to be something that's kind of interesting and fun and sort of new. You don't see that move much. This is the side facing the west, with the upper right hand side of the building having the garden, the mural, which doesn't have to be this sort of aggressive, can be dialed back a little bit. But this is one of the ones that are on the building. We basically just took whatever was on the building. Sections you saw, and then these couple of perspectives that puts the building in somewhat a context. It's a challenging site in that the area is, even with the recycling center gone, is still a lot of sort of people with shopping carts, and the under the freeway is a little heavy duty. But I think an addition of a building like this would bring people to sort of use the retail that's there, the restaurant that's across the street, and in essence add some life to the neighborhood. That's sort of a wanted kind of a life. And I think that's the end of it. So that's about all I have. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer, and the developers here, if you have any questions from them.
Any questions?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. So you mentioned, I'm assuming that you're doing type 5 housing. That's what you were talking
Yes.
about? Okay, and so it's just a question of the type changing if you have to go higher? Okay.
Yes.
And then I noticed in the conversation, there was a discussion around moving the building back in because of the width of the sidewalk. Do you have a dimension street section? Have you looked at that?
I think the survey that we have of the site shows it to be 10 feet.
Okay.
And I think the city's standard is 12. So a couple of feet is what we need to figure out how to provide. You know, one thing I've noticed hanging out at that intersection a little bit, just looking at how things work. People come up right where that car is on the lower side on MacArthur, and they barely stop at that stop sign and only look to the left because that's where the cars are coming, and they turn. And it is like you have to take your life into your own hands to try to cross, and there is no crosswalk on that side either. So that could be a nice thing, and maybe a little bit of encroachment into Adeline would be more sort of beneficial to not allowing the cars to kind of zoom through. But we'll get there. We'll figure out how to get the 12 feet.
Okay. Those are my questions.
So, Mr. Massey, I had two sets of questions. One dealing with parking and the other dealing with the murals. Starting with the parking, if you've hung around that area, as you say, you might have seen that parking is really sparse right in that immediate area, and it's actually getting a lot worse, getting more and more congested. I'm personally seeing a lot more cars kind of circling the block to find parking because there's been such a flourishing of retail in that immediate area, restaurants, bars, and you still got the pizza place there is just really popular. Though this plan meets the minimum specifications for the parking allotment, given that this may actually make the parking situation and thus the traffic congestion a lot worse, so there's a potential of that. So I want to ask you, Mr. Massey, in terms of your parking, do you know if that's going to be assigned to certain units, or is that going to be just general parking for the development?
That's really not my department. Do you have any clue as to how you're gonna? It's a little bit early, but we could have the answer for you for the next round for sure. Just give it some thought and figure out how we're going to manage the parking. We are hoping that there would be enough sort of young professionals living in these units that they tend to have a tendency not to drive as much or even own a car.
Yeah.
You own a car, Jordan? Jordan doesn't own. Maybe he can live in. But that's our hope, and I think that at the end of the day, it becomes a bigger marketing issue than a code issue for a lot of projects. Where would you rent in a place that didn't let you didn't have a parking spot? Is what it comes down to. So, yeah, we'll give that some thought for sure, and come back the next time with some real answers.
Gotcha. So, second questions on murals. You said that there are a very interesting set of murals that exist right there. I agree with you on that. Could you elaborate on some of the comments that you received from staff about the proposal to use murals to cover some of the blank spaces? I believe Maru said the reaction of staff to the murals were mixed. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, I mean, like any art, some people tend to really like and enjoy it, and some people find it either too loud or too offensive or too urban in a way, because street art is not really for everyone. We just did a project on Mandela called Happy Hound. I don't know if any of you have been by it, but we found a young artist that did a painting on the building, and it's just delightful. I mean, something really magical happened with it, and it was really the first time we've ever done it. So it wasn't like something tried and true, but took a leap of faith, and it worked. It shows a certain amount of fingerprints on the building, handmade something. It's not just something you buy at Home Depot and slap it up. So I think it's a good thing, and it also brings back a little bit of the memory of that building that's been sitting there for probably 50 years. I don't know how old it is, but it looks pretty old. So that was our reason for putting it up.
Is it your intention to keep or try to preserve some of the murals that are already there?
That's impossible.
Okay. It's your intention to bring in new art? I see.
Right. Which, I'd imagine, I don't imagine, I know the city will have a say about what that's going to look like. And I'm on the Emeryville Celebration of the Arts, and that would be a place where something like this would be totally appreciated and welcomed, to take a canvas this public to some local artists and have them produce something on it. It could be a lot of fun.
Gotcha. Madam Chair, I know I said two sets of questions. I have one more that occurred to me, if I may. So I'm just going to ask my my colleagues on the dais just to allow me a little latitude on this, because I think it's a relevant issue for that vicinity, but it may not be squarely within the jurisdiction of what we're considering here. But just for the but I think it might be germane as to what we're encountering here, just to get ahead of the ballgame a little bit. As you may know, Mr. Massey, that area has encountered some challenges with arson over the past year. And it seems like we still don't have that suspect in custody yet. So it seems like it's got a bit of a reputation now as being maybe a risky area in which to develop. Do you have any special plans that might be relevant to install there in terms of security should this project go forward and you're allowed to build?
Right. You know, I mean, given the fact that the ground floor up to 15 feet of this building is entirely concrete, is going to be of some help. You can't just pour some gasoline on the ground floor and have it all go up in flames. I don't know how the other one was done, or how the fire got started, but I would imagine the only way to try to keep someone away and keep them from doing it is to put up a tall enough fence and have enough security that they're deterred or they're sort of prevented from doing it. And aside from that, I think just the smallness of this may help it, as opposed to something because that thing you could see from downtown Oakland. It's a pretty tall building, and so and it takes up a pretty good footprint. You know, this is a fairly modest building when it comes to what's going on in the neighborhood. So. Who knows? You have a great point, though. It'll be a disaster if more of these buildings go up in flames.
So, Mr. Massey, you don't have current plans right now for, say, on-the-ground security?
Not right this minute, but I can guarantee that the developers will be working on it to make sure that the same thing doesn't happen to them. It's you can imagine how devastating it would be. So we'll come back with some ideas for sure.
Okay.
Just a couple questions to start off with. So you said that the base or ground floor level is going to be poured concrete. So in other words, you're going to have a podium base, correct?
Right.
So can you explain to me the difference of what would be the added cost of doing a podium base if you added another floor to that, if you're already making a concrete base? So if you added a floor to that, are you just talking some more structural rebar?
So the difference between a Type 5 and a Type 3 building is that all of your exterior walls basically have to be 2-hour fire rated walls. That's one thing. You go up one more floor, you need 2 sets of stairs to go another floor up. You need your elevator to have an extra stop.
Okay, well, let me just stop you there. You already have 2 sets of stairs. So
Yeah, but
that's not an added cost. But you talk, okay,
you're
just
going
another
one more
level
floor.
instead of
That's
stairs.
right.
Okay.
So, and then one big chunk of money that gets added onto it is that you need a man lift when you go over, is it 55? 60. When you go over 60 feet of height, you need a man lift that has to be attended. That's for all the workers
Right.
to be able to go up and down. And that is tens of thousands of dollars added. I mean, at the end of the day, every
Sure.
bit of the money that doesn't go into these buildings ends up kind of diluting their quality and all of that. We see it all the time.
So my second question is, and I don't know if you could get to the slide that everyone else could see, but I'm looking just more of the plot plan of the building sitting on the lot. And I'm wondering, you have the building fronting mainly on Adeline Street, which is what brings it right up to, that's a fine picture there. That brings it right up to the existing neighbor's house. Have you thought of positioning the building all along MacArthur Street and putting the parking along that south side that would abut the neighbors, and then we would kind of eliminate that problem.
Yes, so a couple of things. One was that when we first actually started, there was a podium that covered the entire site with the parking underneath on the ground floor, and then the buildings were up higher. But it's right up against Vicky and Steve's garden. I don't know if you've ever been in that garden. It's a thing of beauty. And between that fact and the fact that we wanted to go to type 5 and didn't really want to build on top of a garage, we basically did this. Now, that house is most likely not going to be there forever, if for long at all. And the idea of sort of adjusting things to something that, because there's enough site in that house that you could build 9 units on it, according to the rules we're using to do this project. And that is going to be, after this goes up, that's going to be an enticing thing to someone. So here we go, mushing things around to accommodate a house which is actually, it's really beautiful on the as an elevation, but it's like in really, really bad shape. I mean, just falling apart. Yeah, we actually kind of tried to figure out how tall it is and drew it up, but it's a little bit of guesswork. But yeah, I mean, it's so, and we are from this corner stepping down 1, 2, 3, 4 times to sort of get a little closer to the scale of the house. But then if somebody built I don't know how many floors they would put up, probably 3 or 4 floors. Then this garden on the 3rd floor of our building is going to look silly, because it's going to be sitting, in a kind of a valley. So that was some of the things we thought about.
Okay, that's all the questions I have.
Hi, Mr. Mency.
Hi.
So the questions I have pertain to the bicycle parking. There was no mention of the security of the bicycle parking. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Oh, of course. We actually have more than what's required, and we have put them right here, which is under the piece of the building that overhangs. And the idea is that this entire site, coming around here to here, is going to be entirely secured by fencing, landscaping, and so on. So those are not only secure, but they're actually covered so that they won't be sitting out in the elements. If I had a really good bike, I'd take it to my apartment.
Has there been any consideration to include internal spaces for residents inside the units?
It's actually brilliant. It's a really good idea. We'll definitely try to include some. I mean, the lobby is actually wide enough to accommodate some hanging, and then we'll look at the units and see because there's so many different ways of hanging them now that we actually, our office in San Francisco has, the previous tenant had hung one from the ceiling, and if you just raise your bike and it just hangs from the ceiling, and it's nice sculpture. It's a beautiful thing. So lots of different ways of doing it. We'll make sure to include that.
My last question is about the vegetation that's on the side of Adeline Street. More of a consideration for pedestrians, ensuring that the vegetation doesn't protrude into the sidewalk. And so mostly just a recommendation in terms of the choices that you make there.
Right. We need to bring in a landscape architect to make sure it's the correct thing to be doing. These landscape pockets these days, given the C3 requirements, which is the water filtering before it gets discharged, basically have to become sort of cisterns. So, and somehow something has to grow in them. It's a difficult thing, but we'll definitely keep that in mind. That's a really good point too.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, Kava, thanks for your presentation. I got a couple of questions for you. On sheet A3.5, the sections. So you show the, the first floor, the floor to floor is 15 feet. So the floor to ceiling is going to be something like 14 whatever, right? So not high enough to have a full mezzanine level.
Right.
But maybe you'd have some raised level or something like that. Did you look at possibly making it higher so you could put a mezzanine in there, get a real?
Yeah, it's that darn man lift. The minute the building gets higher.
So but you said 60 feet is when the man.
Yeah, we're like 5 feet away from getting there.
So if you had another, what you need is 17 feet.
Right.
Clear, so you'd need 3 feet.
Yeah, I mean that was one consideration. The other was to try to keep the square footage of the entire building to a certain number, just because, as you know, you multiply that by the ungodly construction costs these days, and it adds up to a pretty astronomical number. But anyway, that was another reason why we didn't do it.
Got it. Okay, so sheet A3.4, the one before that. So you show the mural, as you noted, it might be, some people might find it a little bit aggressive, et cetera, et cetera. Whatever you do put up there, because it is going to be overlooking the adjacent property, you are probably going to want to run it by that property owner to make sure they're going to be happy living with it, because they're going to be looking at it, whether it's that house or a new development later on.
No, it's so true. No, absolutely. I mean, I didn't want to sort of break the heart of the staff person that picked this one to put on there by having him change it. But it definitely, you want something that you could look at every day and not start cringing because the teeth are starting to show. And yeah.
So sheet A3.1. So you show in this elevation your use of the battens.
Right.
And the battens you describe as solid wood stained battens. Is that correct?
Yes.
So would they be like 4x4s or?
They're actually, I'm hoping they're 2x4s.
2x4s?
Because I'd like a little, I think what happens, and if you ever have a minute to go by that Happy Hound, we use 2x6s. And what really is the thing that catches your eye is their depth, not their girth or their width. I don't know why, but in a way, if it became wider, then you probably want them farther apart, which then I think that the tightness of it is what kind of works.
So the battens on the left, or I think it's the south side, south edge of the elevation there, they extend up and then they stop at what looks like about railing height?
Yes, yeah,
So
that was the idea.
Do they work as a railing?
Yes, yeah, that was the idea.
So I guess you'll have some kind of infill in there to make up the flooring.
There's going to have to be some sort of a structure to hold them up. I don't think we can just be as light as this shows.
Okay, and then your elevation shows the battens going right up over the windows.
Right.
And the doors. And the windows are shown, I guess, with that little triangle. Typically that means a casement window.
Right.
But because the battens are going over it, that would mean it would be a slider of some sort?
They would either have to swing in, which is not a good idea.
Right.
They're not drawn as big enough to be sliders, honestly, and they're just not drawn as, maybe the bigger ones in the living rooms. But all of that are things that we need to sort of get through this stage where we're given a little bit of an encouragement to go work things out, and we'll come back to you with these things figured out and working properly.
So you have, just not to belabor the point, but on the north side of the elevation there, where you have the terraces that stagger one over another, and you have the sliding glass, looks like sliding glass doors.
Right.
Are the battens, are they
They're on the outside.
outer edge where the railing is?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So the battens, you're going to be looking through the battens at the view, whatever view there
Right.
might be.
Right.
Okay, well, I think that, doing something like this is to be applauded, that you're taking a chance at trying to do something that is, gives some artistic vitality to the area. This is clearly something this is a highly textural, literally a textural solution. And you say you've...
Is it a question or
Oh,
is it
yeah.
a discussion?
Right, here's my question. My question is, are you concerned at all about using wood and the straightness and
Right.
trueness?
Well, not just me, but the developers sort of mentioned that I need to have good answers before this is all sort of said and done. And we've talked about using other material that's more durable. One of the things that I would do in this case, because at that Happy Hound project, the actual length or the height of the slats are 20 feet. And it was basically, as we kept running into budget issues, the wood kept getting, it used to be kiln-dried cedar, western red cedar. It ended up being basically just whatever you frame inside of buildings with. Doug fir, pretty rough. So the thing I learned there is to not rely on the length of it and come up with some detailing mechanism that shortens them. And one of the ways to do it is to actually just a simple thing like taking a piece of steel, like an 1/8-inch piece of steel as wide as the wood, and just screwing from the bottom and the top the pieces of wood. That way you cover the end grain, and boom, and you got something that the wood has to kind of work against, because that thing is sitting wobbly. It's like going all over the place. So I think it's going to come down to that. And if these guys are going to be convinced that it's a good way to keep going, I need to convince them first and then come back and convince you guys.
On page 7 of the staff report, the staff asks us to what our opinion is of their suggestion that that you move some of the bulk of the building away from the adjacent house on Adeline Street, increase it towards the intersection. There's been a certain amount of discussion about that by you already. Do you have any ideas about how you might want to address that particular comment beyond what you've done already?
I mean, this again, this little bit of this move we made, bringing down or moving that one bedroom off of that end next to the house in this elevation on the left, was a response to lower the building a little bit. So is it enough? Is it not enough? How far do we go? How far in the other direction do we go? And then what happens when the cars have to get under the building itself to get to the parking, which is what's going to have to happen as we get into the gate area on the... Can I just quickly do this? I'm going the other direction. So as it is right now, the edge of the building is here at 15 feet. And it's only 2 stories, but it's still all the way over here. If it goes over and you have to drive under it, I don't know. It's just and the other thing, that's something I actually had in mind to bring up. This is as efficient as you can make a floor plan, and if we had a unit to get to back here. This hallway now has to extend all the way out here, which will eat into one of the units, and then we have dead-end corridors and all kinds of other bad things could happen. I don't know, I haven't really tried it. But if you guys are convinced that that's something that has to happen, then we'll look at it. And maybe I'll have better answers for you next time.
Thanks.
So my question is whether you have any other examples of this batten siding aside from the Happy
Oh, yeah.
Hound, because
Yes.
I'm having a hard time understanding what it's going to be like from the inside looking out and from around the balconies looking out, and on sheet A3-2, what the where it gets darker and thicker. I'm not understanding how it really
Yeah,
works
that's-
with the interior of the building, and I would like to get a better sense of that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we're going to do is, we actually had a large piece of this built like this big to bring, and I didn't like the way it looked, the way it was built, you know, it wasn't the idea, but, so it's in the back of my car right now. But we'll make sure to have enough definition and also bring some examples of buildings that have done it, viewing from inside and out.
Okay, that would be helpful.
Okay.
I don't have any other questions. We've all had a chance. So this is not a public hearing, it's a study session, but we'd like to hear from members of the public that have something to say about this. Come up one by one and, excuse me, sign into the sign-in sheet when you're done. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Steve Scar. Vicki and I have the property that Kava has been discussing on the west side of the proposed project. And we did go to the community meeting, and as you can tell, we're sort of generally unhappy with the existence of the project right on our property anyway, but we appreciated the efforts of the architect to mitigate the impacts on us, which meant mostly putting the project along Adeline Street and the parking between our property line and the larger building. As
Can I
Kava
interrupt?
says-
Can I interrupt just a second? Can you identify your property? I think I'm a little bit confused. Are you the house that's really close to the building, or are you the one to the west, where the garden is?
They're the ones with the garden.
Okay.
The one with
Okay.
the
I was thinking you were in the other building, so I was a bit confused. Okay, sorry about that.
Okay. So as Kava was indicating, we're fairly lucky in terms of the shadow studies, because they're a little bit to the north and east of us. We only get a little bit of shadow from that larger building, and but I think from our point of view, shadow studies aren't where it's at. It's the fact that we have a massive 5-story, 55-foot tall building right in our sky, and it's going to block out most of our sky. So for that reason, we really resist the ideas that are floated by the planning staff to raise the building any higher than is already planned. And this is the first we heard about this, is tonight, but gosh, I would really hate to see this building go up to 75 feet. And seems like that's where we're headed. And Kava has suggested that that's going to be pretty difficult for him. It's going to make us really unhappy. I don't want to put words in my neighbor's mouth, the man on Adeline Street with the other small house, but he's already got a concrete wall that's right on his property line. He's lived with that for years. Kava's proposal is going to move the wall back 10 feet from the property line and actually open up that space. But really, there's no amount of mitigation that you're going to be able to do with setbacks and so on to solve that problem. He's just going to be facing that wall. Now, his, as I say, not to put words in his mouth, his real concern was the view that he has from the back of his house, which looks over the parking lot. If you move the thing back at all from Adeline Street, that will block that view and make him even more unhappy.
That's the speaker's time, Chair Donaldson.
Yes.
Yeah, I think
We
that's
have-
really all I have to say.
Okay,
So thank you very much.
thank you. Do you wish to speak? I do. Okay, you could sign in afterwards.
So, yeah, I'm Vicki Sewell. This is our homes, 3616, 3618 on Peralta Street. This is the front. This is the side view.
Please stay by the microphone at least.
You
Okay.
Yeah.
We do want to see those, but we want
This is the
you to
side
be
view.
heard.
And then you get to see the side of my house and the Ambassador Affordable Housing. And across the street, you get to see Big Daddy's Community Garden. We've lived there since 1982, sort of as pioneers. We built the community garden and we built a giant garden. We have as much space as you can see as them, and the rest is garden. We live and we work there. My studio's there. I'm a public artist. I've made much public art in Emeryville. We've tried to be good members of the community, and just imagine now that there's no house there. My property is now a 5 to 7 story building with probably many points for the developers to buy into, because they don't have to do anything green. They can just pay to get points. So that's all housing now. And imagine Big Daddy's is a giant 7, 9 story building too. That's what I see for the future of where I live. So I just asked you to imagine that there's a garden there that has a beautiful morning light. Fortunately, my garden had perfect exposures all the time. It won't anymore, because this is what that building will do. There will be no eastern light for me, and probably some of the southern as soon as you put that other extension out. And he did like seeing Pack and Save, and they talked about that view if you cut him off, my other neighbor behind me. The other thing, try to imagine me living there with that giant building with the balconies for me to get to look into our backyard. And then imagine that for a long time, if you can see that green wall by my house, that's a brick wall that existed behind US Spring, and now there's a living wall there. Extends into my neighbor's property. That's how we divide our wall. It's brick and it's been very secure. So for me, the other thing I worry about is the safety in this neighborhood now, that you're going to make me have a chain link fence behind there for someone to jump. Lastly, there is no such thing as the parking limit you got there. Of the affordable housing unit, I heard it all from Ambassador. It's quite a nightmare now, at the parking in my neighborhood, because the people don't have one car. They have friends that have cars, and then they have 2 cars. And then they don't even park in their parking spaces, and they park on the street. And it's not a safe neighborhood. Unfortunately, it's sort of being eaten alive by the homeless. It's kind of an abandoned part of town because it's surrounded by Caltrans and West Oakland on the other side, which are kind of negligent neighbors. And
We need to
Emeryville
wrap
won't take
up.
response. I know, it's only my life, and I got 3 minutes.
Was there another neighbor that wished to speak?
Good evening. My name is John Sedgwick. I'm a homeowner and resident of Adeline Place, 3801 San Pablo, which is directly north of the project. My 2 comments. First off, since I've been a very close witness to the fires at the Mazzy building in the past year, I would be really interested in arson mitigation plans for this development. We didn't have our building did not have any damage at the first fire, but the second fire, most of the windows on the San Pablo side of the building were cracked. Most of the paints were shattered by the heat. And secondly, for the units that are on the MacArthur side of our building, I'm wondering what sort of what's going to happen to their view from their units. Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak on this? Okay.
My name is Daryl Rush, and I have the building just on the other side of Adeline. I'm a contractor, and I've had that building since 1990. And I'm here about parking. We have 4 tenants in our building that don't have cars, and we've specifically rented to people to not have cars. And I was wondering if there's any way that could be put as a provision into the, since they're not providing parking spaces, if they could target people, and the city could enforce that they would, in their leases, have people, a certain number of people that wouldn't have cars. So what they're actually proposing would work, because there is no parking in the neighborhood any longer. Mm-hmm. And that if that wouldn't work, if there could be, we have decal for parking, mm-hmm. and so the people in that building could not get the decal. I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but the people that are there right now, unfortunately my building has no parking whatsoever. Lane Splitters has no parking. Sens has a little bit of parking, but since the building was built at the Ambassador, they're parking on the street all around on our side, and there's just no parking whatsoever. So anyway, that would be my request, if there was some kind of a covenant that could be put into the lease agreements and all that. Right, thank you.
Could you sign into the sign-in sheet, please? Yeah, thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak on this? Okay. All right, commissioners, who would like to start a discussion?
I have plenty of comments.
Okay.
Can start. First of all, I do want to recognize that this is a difficult site. It's particularly small. It's in a neighborhood that has been neglected. And hearing their comments of the neighbors, the situation that is your concern right now is what these type of projects mitigate. These types of buildings bring more people to the neighborhood. They make more safe streets. They make more eyes on the streets. This type of development is what a city needs. We're no longer a suburban city, but we are becoming urban. That is what our general plan requires us to do. So I think the fact that it's neglected is part of what we're trying to correct with these types of projects. So it is a difficult site. I would still like to see the building, at least an idea of the building placed along MacArthur Boulevard, because then it would create an opening along Adeline Street, which is where the morning sun would come through. The building would basically front the north, so it would, I think, allow more light into the block, because it becomes a valley or a canyon of a light shed. So I don't think that's really the problem. It would pull it away from more people's homes that way. But if it's just not viable, it's not viable. So I just wanted to put that out there. The biggest thing we talked about tonight are the wooden battens. I'm going to have to say that, Mr. Mashi, I know a lot of your work. I like a lot of your work. I've seen a lot of these battens on buildings. There's actually one on 41st Street near where you built some condos several years ago in Oakland. And in West Berkeley, there's a lot of buildings. The problem I foresee with these is, number one, I think it kind of creates a prison look for the people who live inside the buildings. I just couldn't imagine seeing out my windows and seeing those boards in the way. Additionally, I think long-term care for them, the stained wood becomes unstained, it becomes splintered, it becomes warped. So I just see these as even though I like the overlap, the balconies, I think that's really creative. Like Commissioner Banta said, it's really textural. but I think there's other options, perforated metal we could look at. And I think with what you're describing to manufacture these things, with all the supports to keep them from warping, the cost has got to be pretty high on this. And I think that's a place where you guys could save some money and do something else. So I'd like to, if you guys choose to do those, that's of course your prerogative, but I just don't see it as an amenity to the project as much as later on down the road. My business is I manage buildings for University of California, and I have 100-year-old buildings, and I see what age does to buildings, and this just doesn't look like it's going to be a friend to the building in 15 to 20 years. I would, like every project, I appreciate the bicycle parking, that it's covered and everything, and looking at the constraints of this, I would just like to, when you come back, I'd like to hear that you've at least looked at lockers. If you can't place them, just say that you've looked at it and you can't find a space, but I believe 3 to 5 lockers for residents is really important. And I think you need to definitely look at meeting the open space requirements. That's definitely going to be something that I'm not going to feel the predilection to letting that be less than what we require for the city. The sidewalks need to be 12 feet. That's something that my partner and I advocate all the time, is that, you know, we need sidewalks in this city that are walkable for people. And I love the idea of the road diet and the crosswalk. I would definitely support any idea that you're going to work towards on that. Trying to be quick and succinct to give everyone a chance. The murals, I'm glad I didn't forget that. I'm not a fan of murals in general, and I think 5 murals in this building is too much. I would prefer to see no more than 2. 1 is preferable. And I think for the walls that are left open, we have many options in doing green walls. I was thinking as we were talking, you could do a sculptural type thing that could be really well lit at night, and perhaps it could be reflective of the auto industry that used to be there. You know, something interesting with the leaf springs or something like that. But I think there's many options to address that wall, that we don't just take this simple, easy way out and paint them all. I think it's a little too garish. And the proposed parking, parking is a issue throughout town. It is always going to be an issue. The way that this parking code is now written is it's to encourage less automobile reliance. I support that. This project meets our current codes, and I think the city is going to eventually be working very soon on a street parking policy that I think will help address these items. But it's a change of paradigm, and it's going to take time for things to change, and change is uncomfortable. But I totally support anything that discourages a single occupant vehicle, and I know as a fact that fewer parking spaces does do that job. And it's going to be a growing pain period of a time, but I think the city's working on the parking policies that will help address those things. So I'm definitely in support of what we have figured out for parking right now. And I think at this time, that's all I have.
Okay, my comments relate to the murals and the art and the buildings. Contrary to some of the comments made, I do believe that the murals complement and blend in with the neighboring environment. I do think that there should be some effort to blend a bit more with some of the mosaic art that I see nearby. I think that might be a nice way to complement what's there already. And in terms of the parking, as a young person who I feel reflects what's coming to this city, I don't own a car as well, and think that I agree. The parking spaces are a challenge to begin with there, but most people my age at this point are looking for alternative ways of transportation. So biking being the reason I mentioned that, having more secure spaces inside would help promote the use of bikes. And the outside parking for guests, I think, could be increased a bit. And 3 may not be enough. And access to local buses being something that we can look at there to help residents that choose not to have a car. So safety crossing that street there would be something to consider at some point. Those are my comments.
Well, a lot of very interesting comments from neighbors tonight. and I just thought I'd address a couple of them. You know, the business of putting a big building on this corner as being one of a number of big buildings marching through the neighborhood. That is the result of the zoning that supports this size building. And of course, that zoning was put in place as a result of a long general plan process, and also as part of just the general progress of cities at trying to provide housing, which is, of course, we're all in dire need of. Nonetheless, you know, that may be little consolation to immediate neighbors, and the comments made by the neighbors immediately to the west about the impacts of the building on their property. Indeed, there will be impacts, shadow impacts, you know, for a good part of the year in the morning. But fortunately, in the middle of the day and the end of the day, you're not going to have those impacts. If the building were reconfigured to have the mass of it along MacArthur, those impacts would be greater, I think, on the property. So I think that the choice of massing, it seems to me to make sense the way it is right now. The use of battens as a kind of an aesthetic device, I think the architects to be applauded for, you know, making the effort to make something out of the building more than what typical buildings are. There are all those considerations that he is aware of about doing it so it's done right, because if it's done wrong, it really is kind of counterproductive. And you have all those things working against you, like the wood that's going to flex and the maintenance issues over time that another commissioner has pointed out. So I think the battens are great, but I think you got to use the right material to make them work. And in my mind, I think your batten concept would still be very strong if it was interrupted at the windows, which would allow good views out the windows and allow you to open the windows as casements as well. Solve a few problems right there. There is a type of art called lenticular art. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but what it involves is it's almost like you take a canvas and you fold it into an accordion so that it has a set of ridges, and the ridges that face to the right are all painted in one particular color or with one particular image. The images and the ridges that face to the facades that face to the left are painted with a different color, different image. And as you walk by it, you get the image comes into focus and it changes entirely. So it makes it a very dynamic art form. And this, in fact, is completely open to that kind of consideration. It would be something that would take a lot of effort and planning and so forth, but it would be a pretty darn interesting building if you thought to do that. The planning staff has asked us to address this issue of massing, you know, along Adeline Street and how it impacts the building immediately to the south. I think the applicant has made an effort to step down. You know, I see 3 steps in any case. And I think I think that, I mean, in order to do an additional reduction of mass without totally rearranging your floor plan, you'd end up losing another bedroom to a unit below at the very southern end. So that may not be in your pro forma, I don't know. You have on your I guess this is the eastern facade, you have the facade coming out in kind of overlapping panels, and it might be that at the very southern end you might bring a portion of the building out in another panel that tends to help break up the mass at that end. Anyway, that's a thought, something to think about. And my opinion of the murals is that it's great if it's done right, but I also like the idea of green walls. Parking is, you know, I know cities love to reduce parking, and the case has been made for the ultimate effect that you have to eventually, as as a group, we learn how to cope with it, but it can be painful. So those are my comments.
Would you like to comment?
Okay, so a few points here. Start by highlighting just overall the artistic stab this applicant took for this development. I think it's a great first crack. I think you heard a lot of comments, which I won't belabor in terms of some of the specifics of how it could be improved in the second go around, but I really laud the applicant's attempt to take an artistic stab at this and not take a cookie cutter approach. Especially given that this is a neglected part of town, it'd be great to just bring something interesting, to just change the tenor of that piece of property. So while there's a lot of improvements that are going to be made, I really just want to further encourage the developer to keep that tenor and keep that artistic quality in mind. Secondly, wholeheartedly agree with my colleague, Commissioner Keller, about reinforcing the walkability of the area, especially given that there's so many restaurants and ground floor retail that's sprouting up, especially along Adeline. Adeline is becoming kind of a pseudo restaurant row for our humble little city. And I think making that walkability to reinforce, to have the people and the eyes on the street, which will have great social effects as well, I think that should be very much encouraged. And I know that's in tension with fewer parking spaces that are available, but I'm uncomfortable forcing the issue to happen with this development. I think it's got to be a more comprehensive approach than that. And I really do think, in my mind, I know there's disagreement on this dais about this, is I don't think there's enough parking spaces there. And I think where that's coming from is, while I acknowledge that we want to encourage more walkability in this city, we also want to respect, I also want to respect the people who are already there, our neighbors and our residents who are already there. So, I think it's easy to talk about folks who we want to attract and want to come, but I'm a little bit uncomfortable with saying people of a certain age don't drive anymore, because I think that overlooks folks of different ability, different diversity, families who would just need a car to get around. If you've ever tried to take public transportation with 2 kids in tow, go to a grocery store, riding AC Transit, it's not really realistic for some families. So I know there's some tension here on the dais, but I think in terms of how do we creatively work out parking that meets the folks who are going to live there, but also respects the quality of life for the residents and neighbors that we have in that vicinity, I think is what we'd like to shoot for. I'll just end with this. Just want to reinforce the point of my other colleagues on the dais saying, just looking at the big picture here, we need this kind of development there, because that's exactly how it's going to combat some of the detrimental things that already exist, such as the crime that's already there, things that we want to clean up. So in order for that to happen, we need to bring residents there. We need to bring a development in order to make that happen.
Any comments?
Sure. I also have several comments. Overall, I did want to say that the project as envisioned is a great start in terms of understanding what could go there and what sort of mix and what kind of building would go there. I think there is an overall need for affordable units, and I know that hasn't been spoken about a lot. And so the idea of providing additional housing in a market that really needs that housing is a great goal. I think I want to echo a lot of the comments that have already been said in terms of as a developing city look to maintain walkability. This is a pretty intense intersection. The ability to have a good quality sidewalk, the ability to be able to cross the roads is part of the transportation reality of not having cars. And so that has to be kind of equally weighted as having a good walking environment, even given that the context is not suited to that. But anything that you can do to help that in terms of the sidewalk width, in terms of the crossings, I think is an excellent part of development of this project. I do think, and particularly hearing from the neighbors, I do think a little more attention to the solar analysis has to be done. And I've seen this a couple times, is that for you, you only need a 3x3 matrix, but we really do need an analysis of the solar study. So where does it really impact? What are the details? So that would really help as you develop this. Also, the unit layouts, I know that's for development, but I think that will matter in terms of how the units are laid out. So I look forward to having that information. I do also want to add that the secured bike parking, I think, is really critical. I have a kid and I don't have a car, and we have lots of bikes in our house, and we won't put them any place because we don't have a secured place, and it takes up real estate. As you have smaller units, it's a huge problem in terms of not having that real estate. So secured bike parking, we've also had our bikes stolen, so so having something that's secured is really important. Also planning for the overflow. People do have visitors, so really a comprehensive management plan of what happens when people show up, really to honor the neighbors and understand that management from a management perspective. I think that's critical. Also, as someone who is relatively new to this community, there are all sorts of things you can do in terms of transit and traffic demand management. You know, giving new people Clipper cards, or looking at the timing of the parking, or making sure that people can get their kids to school, giving them information as to where buses are, how to get to transit. These are all key components that have to be really well orchestrated and thought out. I would also add the murals. Given that we just have a cultural capital designation, I think murals can be great, but the question about the quality of them is an important one. And also, how does that support the community? How can you make it an activity that maybe involves people, maybe starts a business? There are some components there that I think you can work with. So those are some of the key large comments. I had a couple of building-specific comments. I think people have talked about the other commissioners have talked about the southern side and that question of massing. I think the Adeline Street frontage is effective in terms of the massing. I'm a little concerned about the back corner, which doesn't come down. That still might be a big 4-story non-windowed wall to the southern neighbor. So I'd say take a look at that again. The community room is a strange space to me. It's very, very small. I'm not sure that it's usable, but yet I like the idea that there would be a community space. And then also, I felt as though the MacArthur facade didn't quite get as much attention. So perhaps looking at that and looking at the articulation of the massing on that side. The orientation I'm okay with, but I think it's also related to the solar study. So I'd encourage you to look at that as that develops. And then the only thing I wanted to do was to say one thing about the batten idea. I too think that it's a really interesting take. I like the way that sort of level of articulation. I also am concerned about construction quality, maintenance. Love to understand how that would really work. Also, there may be a reality around color and having the background windows needing more window if you're putting, a batten in front of the window. So those are all things that I think you will need more detail about. So other than that, those are some of my comments, and overall, great start. Some really good things to work with here.
Thank you. I agree with a lot of the comments of other commissioners. I think that real attention needs to be given to stepping back the massing a little bit rather than overhanging and increasing the massing around the building from the floor plate up to the next levels, because it really does impact the surrounding properties to have things moving closer as they get higher. The solar study, I was interested to see that it didn't impact very much except for the morning in some of the times of year, but otherwise that it didn't create that much of a difference, but I think that it does need to be looked at more. And I also really appreciate the comments about what it does to the neighbor's skyline. So having at least a look at it stepping back at the higher levels so it doesn't cut up so much of the sky. I mean, I'm addressing that every day with the buildings of the transit center going up and the parking lot that's going up. My sky gets smaller and smaller all the time, and I understand that as an issue. The live work spaces at the bottom, I'm just wondering whether those could be looked at a little bit more as some kind of alternative uses, and whether it's for secured bicycle parking, for whether it's for an enlarged community area, or whether it's working out some way to put some additional parking in there. I think it would be really a good thing to look at that ground floor and how it's working. I have a real problem. I think we have a conflict between trying to get family-friendly housing with 3-bedroom units and saying, and you don't have any place to park your car. I think it's a real problem, and it's an increasing problem in the neighborhood. So I have a real difficult time, and I know that it's been done to the regulations that we have, but it's like taking the minimum amount of parking and cutting it in half just does not seem realistic to me. Those are my main concerns. I think that Commissioner Banta's comments about looking at the batten away from the windows or having some alternative to that, because I think that there will be maintenance issues, and it also does make it look sort of hemmed in and sort of, I have real concerns about what it looks like from the inside if you're trying to look out your windows and you have these boards marching along the front of your windows. I think that the treatment of the balconies on the front corner are interesting. And maybe the solar study and looking at the property from different angles so that we understand the massing and what it does to the property at the west would be a really a useful thing to have the next time we see that. So that was, as far as the murals go, I can see them being used in a limited way. I don't think that it makes sense to put them on the southern wall, because they are something that neighbors are going to be looking out their window at all the time. Also, I think that if those small houses transitioned, you'd have a mural against a big wall on the other side anyway. I appreciated Ms. Soule's comments about bonus points being done with greening of the building. I think that looking at more greening, energy efficiency, solar features would be a good thing as well. So that's my comments at this time. In terms of amenities that might be added, we need to see if we're having family-friendly places. We need to see some kind of flexible play space for the kids that we would hope would be living there. Does anyone have any?
Chair Donaldson?
Yeah.
If I could just make one comment with regard to this, the last comment you just made concerning the bonus points and the community benefits. The way our code is written currently, in order to receive community benefits, they would have to choose from among the 6 categories that are listed, plus the flexible community benefit. Unfortunately, the addition of greening the building or solar panels or whatever is not currently on the list. The only energy efficient measure that is on the list is zero net energy, and that means the entire building has to have be designed for zero net energy. They could propose what's called a flexible community benefit, which would cover solar panels and other things like that, since the flexible community benefit covers anything that's not on the list. However, that would trigger City Council approval of the project. So that's just to clarify what our code says now.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah.
I just have one more comment I've forgotten to mention. I'd also just like to see more details when you come back on the trash collection and the storage of that. That's a real pet peeve of mine, is I don't want to see those things hanging out on the street for people to go picking through while they're waiting for pickup and et cetera. And it looks like a fairly small enclosure. That means that the things have to be drug out to the sidewalk, and I don't know if the trash collecting company does that, or if the residents have to bring, not the resident, but the property manager has to do it. So just need to see more details addressing the trash collection.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Can I ask some clarifying questions?
Sure.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Ali Kashani. My partner, Joe Blum's here. I appreciate all your thoughtful comments regarding parking and battens and bulk. The staff has asked you specifically to comment on 3, and you have done pretty well on all. But one of the questions they have asked is, we have proposed to pay for to your small business fund to meet the other 50 points. And that actually ties into amenities and community benefits. We would appreciate if you could share with us your thoughts about how to do that. I just heard Commissioner Donaldson mention something about amenities for families. I commend you for your zoning ordinance that tries to create usable space for families in projects. I've built those before. I'm very familiar with them. This site is really too small to meet all of that. So we're challenged by the physical constraints of this site. We don't have a large podium or large play areas for kids to put a play structure, for example. So we would appreciate your thoughts on what you think we could do to meet those amenities for families. We have 4 3-bedrooms in this project, 11 2-bedrooms, 11 ones, and 3 studios. So the 4 3-bedrooms will have 4 families, potentially, 8 to 12 kids on the property. So we'd appreciate your thoughts on that.
Do you have thoughts on
Sure. I think this is true of most small sites, is that space is at a real premium and a constraint. And I would say in an urban condition, it is important to think about where the nearest park is.
Right.
And how you get there. Because, I certainly have those same issues having a child in the city. We do select places that are near parks where we choose to live, or places where I can hop on a bus and get to a park or walk within a couple miles. So I think that's an element that you can add in your package, as you can begin to look at the region, talk about the mechanics of how someone would get to one. That I think is the starting point. And then I think I would welcome other people's comments about in terms of what could be done on site as well, because usually a super tiny space that isn't usable isn't that useful. And so I don't know sort of what other commissioners might think in terms of threshold of space or creative ideas around space.
Thank you.
I think that there are a lot of alternatives to a traditional play structure that are just more, that's why I said flexible play space. There are things that can be designed sort of creatively that kids can use their imagination and find ways to use movable things and things that don't have to be built into the space itself. So providing space that's flexible enough that it could be used in various ways by kids of different ages is important.
So like some amenities inside the community room for kids, that could be considered not space that's outdoors. We don't really have outdoor space for kids in this project.
Well, you've got your roof deck, which is pretty ample in size. And the only issue with that, of course, is parents getting worried about their kids climbing over the railing.
Right.
So you'd have to design that to prevent against that. But you also, if you design it in a way where it's easy for the parents to lounge around while their kids are playing, maybe have some way where they can, recharge their phones or computers or whatever. And then, of course, you're going to want to put a platform and a little faucet in so for the older kids can drop water balloons on the test fields below.
Yeah, you build landscaping before the wall so they can't get to it. Right. If I may ask one more question, we all have heard this inherent tension between the paradigm shift that's happening with, our lifestyles are changing from car ridership to other alternative modes of transportation. And we know that. And in this project, the 15 spaces, it's not like we're not providing any parking. We have 15 spaces for 4 families. So the families will have parking spaces. But as the staff has mentioned, a transportation demand management study needs to be done, or we go and get this project as green rated. And one of the projects we did is we offered, for a parking reduction, we offered residents free bus passes, Clipper cards, as you mentioned. That, to some extent, addresses that tension, that people will know that if once they move into this project, they have a benefit of receiving from the landlord Clipper cards. So we would look at that as we go through this process, and we'll come back to you and let you know what we can propose.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, our next agenda study session item is the Doyle Street Muse. Thank you very much.
Could we take a 5-minute break?
Yes, we'll take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 8:34. 8:33.